Optimism.
Hello, everybody. Um, First of all, thank you so much to you all, to the whole congregation, to the worship committee for having me here today. Thank you, Johnny, for helping me through the process and getting me ready to go. And I'm really happy and feel very humbled to be here today. Um, as Johnny said, my name is Tammy Brown. I'm actor, director, human rights activist, and born and raised here in Rhode Island. And as Johnny alluded to, you may have seen me around town recently. I live in Cranston now, but I am also the artistic director of the Contemporary Theater Company, which is right on Main Street in Wakefield. So if you see me around town, feel free to stop me and say hello. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself, about how I grew up, and then kind of about how I approach my work as an activist today. Um, so I live in Cranston now, but I actually grew up in the Hartford Park housing projects in Providence, and I was the only child of a single mom. And I feel like my upbringing wasn't particularly easy, but it wasn't exceedingly difficult either. I had a lot of love around me, but there were struggles too, ups and downs, like everybody. Um, but I feel like there was certainly some violence and negative aspects of the community that I lived in. But to me, one of the most difficult parts of growing up in a housing project system is the smallness of the world. The world gets really small, I find, when you live in a housing project because there becomes a really strong like delineation between the people who live inside and the world outside. There's not a lot of like sometimes not a lot of like cross pollination. When I grew up, we had a lot of folks who wouldn't like do like deliveries into our neighborhood. I had friends that wouldn't visit me at home because of the neighborhood I lived in, and so it made the world feel really kind of small. And I think that makes it become really easy to get kind of trapped in that cycle of poverty and not really having a strong understanding of how to break that. And so the reason I bring that all up is because I think that is what in part like contributed to my approach of optimism in the world, because I think I learned at a really young age to see the possibilities beyond what was just in front of me. And I think that unfortunately a lot of folks who live in those type of situations can't see the possibilities because they're not shown them, and they don't have access to like understanding that there's a life in a world beyond sort of the small situations that you're growing up in. But to me, I feel like that is what encapsulates optimism to me. Like I called my talk Optimism and Action, but I kind of struggled with that a little bit because it sounds a little bit cliche, I think, especially now. But I think that to me, optimism just means seeing the possibilities in the world around you and then having a belief that those can come to happen. Being having a belief that those can be real someday. Um, and so that's something I've definitely carried with me since I was a kid. I feel like the poem that I read today was a great example of that as well, because it's like, especially right now, we all feel despair. Well, I can't say we all, but I would say many of us feel a sense of despair. We feel a sense of exhaustion. I mean, it's like, how do you see the possibilities in the world when it feels like we're moving backwards instead of forwards? Like great Martin Luther King quote of like the great arc of history like bends toward justice. I always believe that's true. I always will believe that's true, but it's hard today to really, really believe that in your heart when you feel like on that arc you're moving this way and not that way. Um, but when you look at history, you see these cycles and these backlashes that can last a long time, and it's really hard to live through those times. But it is a part of the cycle of progress, and it's a part of what we all have to kind of live with and go through as we kind of like dedicate ourselves to making the world a better place. But I say that for the poem that it it's a it's it was a great choice today because it pairs optimism with despair in a particular way. It says that even though the world is giving me messages that tell me I shouldn't believe, the world is giving me messages that tell me I shouldn't fight, that tell me I'm not worthy, that I'm not worth my place in the world. You there's an intrinsic value in everyone, and if you believe that that exists in you, then you can fight for that for yourself, and then once you start to be able to fight for that for yourself, you can start to fight for that for others. And I think that's where it starts. So I talk about optimism kind of paired with despair. And that's kind of where my journey as an activist began because I'm a board member of the Womxn Project. If those many of you probably are familiar with the Womxn Project, it's originally based right in South Kingstown, and we're like an activism group that sort of pairs like artistic methods and sort of direct action methods to advance policy, and particularly policy around reproductive rights, and also racial justice. And the way I became involved with them was out of an extreme feeling of despair. Actually, that's the way the Womxn Project formed, because it formed after the 2016 election. Like I hate to give any credit to that election in any way because it was so painful and destructive for, I would say, all of us. I'm not even going to say even for the people who don't acknowledge that it was destructive. It was destructive for all of us. But out of that, and I think we probably all, maybe many of us felt that at the time, out of that came a sense of purpose, a sense of obligation to fight for the country that we believe in the United States and the values that we believe that the United States stands for. And so I wasn't part of the original group that formed the Womxn Project, but it was those types of motivations that kind of inspired those people to come together, and they listened to talks from various community organizations. They heard a talk done by Planned Parenthood, and that inspired them to pair their feelings of hurt and pain and frustration into action. And because there was a particular goal in mind, because we didn't realize how precarious our reproductive rights were in Rhode Island at the time, and that there was a bill already that had been being pushed forward to advance those rights. And so having the feeling of despair, the kind of galvanization of we need to be able to do something about it, and then having something to do about it, I think is what led to all of the action that the Womxn Project has done over the last 5 years. And I think those are the kinds of things we want to be able to draw on today as people, as a society, as folks who are feeling lost, feeling desperate, feeling alone, feeling hopeless, to be able to take care of ourselves, acknowledge that those feelings are real and honest, and we can't deny them, but to be able to use those as a force, a continued force for good in the world is really important. And like my talk is called Optimism and Action, and it's like, okay, how do you take those feelings and turn them into action? How how are they related? I started thinking about, is it, do you have to have optimism first? Do you have to have that belief that that the world can be better first, or do you need to have something to do first, and then you start doing the thing, and then the action itself sparks those feelings of optimism in you, and then it sparks the community that like leads to a movement. I don't know. I think it's both. I think you have to have a little bit of both, but I think if you can cling on to at least one or the other in these really, really tough times, I think it's something. You're holding on to the you're kind of holding on to the cliff with your fingertips there. But if you can hold on to at least a little bit of hope that we can improve the world that we're in, and that there are action steps we can take to make the world better, even small ones. That's kind of what I cling to also, is that anything you do to make the world better is real, it's valuable, and it's important, and that's what helps us all get through. So even if it's just reaching out to a friend and saying, I was thinking about you today, that's a positive thing that you're doing in the world, and I'm sure that person is going to welcome that with a lot of joy. And you might be buoying them on a day when they feel like they can't kind of press on in the ways that we want to. So it's like being able to do small little actions that help to make us feel more connected to each other, and then when you feel ready, there's always bigger actions that you can do, and being in community with each other is a great way to do that as well. And part of it is, obviously, you can hook up with the Womxn Project if you want to know like specific things that we're doing in Rhode Island, particularly around reproductive rights. But there are ways to sort of support our siblings across the country who are dealing with these terrible issues. And I think that we can use the despair to galvanize us into action. It doesn't have to be a barrier. I think that's what I've been talking with a lot of folks about how they're feeling these days, and they feel that despair, and it makes you want to just give up. It makes you want to just quit, because so many of us have been working on these issues for decades, and then to have all that wiped away, it's devastating. It absolutely is. So we have to feel that devastation. We have to take a breath, take a moment, take care of ourselves and each other, and start to rebuild those again. It's just what we have to do, and there are ways to do it. And I think, we can take lessons from the folks who have worked to dismantle our rights. They didn't despair. They didn't feel, they didn't take a break. They didn't give up. They, little by little, election by election, judge by judge, chipped away over the course of decades. They had some luck happen along the way, and it allowed them to achieve their goals. So I think if we take a lesson from that, we can see the possibilities that we have. We're actually, I'm kind of veering off. I wrote a bunch of stuff, and now I'm like kind of veering off topic. Please stop me if I'm going over time. But that's one thing we're doing with the Womxn Project right now. One thing I've been involved in a little bit is getting people to still feel very connected to the local political process. I wasn't trying to make this talk particularly political, but here we are. In whatever ways you feel like that's feasible for you, but just staying involved in the local political process is so important. It's so vital. On the national level, we want to still keep fighting for sure, but these battles are going to be held certainly right now and for the foreseeable future in our local governments, I think. And so there's a lot we can do, especially in Rhode Island, but even in surrounding states. There's a lot we can do to stay involved there and to help get folks elected that really, really fight for our values and not just say they fight for our values on paper, but are actually doing the work to achieve the goals we want to achieve. So I will leave this by saying that I know that I know how folks are feeling right now, but there is a way forward, and we have to recommit ourselves to that. And it could be a long time until we achieve the level of human rights and dignity that we had previously had. And that's really sad and unfortunate, but it is the world that we live in currently. But we have to stay involved and we have to stay connected if we want to make progress and if we want to achieve our goals for humanity into the future. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you for coming. And Tammy will